but Jim, you think this is it? We go to 1500 and we back down for a year? I say, no, we're going straight for 1900. The time that it took to go to 1400 to 1500 was what, month and a half? The time between 1500 and 1600, I think it's going to be about 3 weeks.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the special interview. Today we have a returning guest to the show, Jim Willie from golden-jackass.com. That's goldenjackass.com, where if you're not a subscriber to the Hat Trick Letter, I got to tell you, if you're looking for some independent analysis of gold, silver, the US dollar, the markets in general, the economy and geopolitics, Jim offers it all from an independent lens that is an alternative to the mainstream. Highly valuable information at golden-jackass.com. I encourage you to check that site out. Jim, thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
It's a pleasure to be back, Paul. I get kind of repetitive, but I say since the last interview, so much has happened. It is true every single time, and that is a story in itself. We're in the quickening. We're in an environment that's fast changing. We're in an environment that will possibly involve some rapid breakdowns, but also some rapid reversals. Like for instance, we might suddenly get a little breakthrough between the US and China on something important. That's been friction filled, but maybe not. The progress might be with, say, Hong Kong and what the United States and the British are doing there to cause problems. I mention this frequently, and some people haven't heard it before. I have a client who told me about a year and a half ago, my son was just hired by a Soros fund to carry a placard and to yell and to be part of a demonstration regarding Hong Kong, and I think it was the South China Sea. This Hong Kong demonstration is a little different. This is more about true independence and, how should I describe it? Much less Chinese government involvement and more it's hard to describe it. I think the people in Hong Kong are resentful that they're not truly independent, and they're getting swung around a little bit on the Chinese yuan currency tail. And the US is trying to use a currency weapon, Paul, and it's kind of ugly what we do. We don't get our way, we try to exert some influence, and we say, well, we got some leverage here with the currency. So we try to influence their economy by mucking up the currency climate. And this is pretty nasty. I don't want to get into a whole lot of the sidebar stories, but I would like to just cover them at a brief, superficial level. It's the US Langley folks that are hiring, and it's the British MI6 that are hiring. And the US side already got caught. There was an interview with some middle-level manager of the demonstrations and the organization of it all. And it was shown that the person was a member of the U.S. government and the security agencies. Okay, and they got outed, and the United States government came back and said, oh, the Chinese are acting like thugs, revealing like, what? No, they're exposing the thugs. They're not thugs by exposing it. A mirror is not at fault for showing an ugly person. That's one of my little catchphrases. Don't blame the mirror, don't blame the messenger. This is the reality you have to deal with. Okay, we're trying to cause whatever problems we can for China. We're trying to cause problems with, say, foreign direct investment. We're trying to get return and closure of Chinese investment in Europe, North America, and just make it go back home. We're trying to influence Huawei, which is a complete failure. Huawei is number one. Brazil just signed up for Huawei for their 5G. It's going to be all through Latin America. We got Huawei firmly in place in Costa Rica here. Okay, so it usually backfires. And I've been saying this consistently. Every foreign policy initiative since 9/11 has been a failure. And you can make a long list of like 20 of them. I mean, what about all that pressure we put on Venezuela back in March? I heard some silly people say, Jim, it's gonna be a war. And I said, no, it's not. We're gonna back off like fools with tail between our legs. And we might move on to some other place, like, I don't know, Iran. And that's what we did. And now we're gonna back off in Iran. We already did. A month ago, Senator Rand Paul, the son of Ronald Paul, was assigned as the emissary to kind of smooth things out with Iran. And I just kind of laughed when I read that. Oh my gosh, they bypassed Pompeo and Bolton, the two real nasty, warmongering, troublemaking neocons. Everywhere they go, they try to foment conflict, friction, and maybe start a good war. I actually call them, in my private moments, the senators from the military complex. Okay, and it's not going to work what we're doing in Hong Kong. It's just not going to work. The other area that's on the fringe for extreme relevance to the dollar and gold and banking and the economy, my topics that are core to the newsletter, is this Epstein case. When he got arrested, Paul, my first reaction was, why did the swamp allow that? Not that, oh gosh, this is going to turn out to be really ugly and messy, and we might get some revelations and we might learn a lot and some heads will roll. No, my question was, why did they permit him to get arrested? He's too big a target. It was a story unto itself that he was arrested. Not arrested for what? No, that he was arrested. Why was it permitted? Why was he not protected? Why was he available? Why wasn't he hidden somewhere in Israel or Paraguay? Why wasn't he? This is very, very big. Piecing it together is not easy. I tried to yesterday in a conversation, and I got some thoughts that are all lined up in my head in sequence. The first big issue is he really dead, or was it a fake death like Kenneth Lay or Barbara Olson, who was supposedly on a New York, Boston flight on 9/11? No, she wasn't. She was moved quickly to Sweden. Is Epstein really dead? And I got information from my best of all best sources for international geopolitical, high-level, very high-level stuff. And he told me, told my whole group, he said, Epstein was killed. Epstein was killed over a week ago, and it was all kept quiet as they managed things. He didn't hang himself in a cell. You can't even do that. They take your belt and your shoestrings. What? Hanged himself by his shirt? That wouldn't even work. Okay, so it's all a false story. The narratives are false. I mean, it's so consistent. 70 to 80% of all the news is false. And 78 to 80% of all the alternative online news is true. Nothing's 100%. Pardon me. The majority of mainstream is just poppycock nonsense. Like, never had a stronger U.S. economy. Are you kidding me? Okay, so Epstein was probably one level down from the most important black veil project that has been in place for a full generation to control the U.S. government officials, to control, say, certain judges, to control certain senators, committee leaders, committee chairmen, to control, say, news network executives, to control Hollywood actors, to control, say, certain Hollywood producers, executives, to control certain corporate executives that have nothing to do with, say, news or energy or Hollywood or music. Okay, what do I mean by control? I mean by sex and drug blackmail. And what is the root of the control center? Well, it's that little nation on the southeast corner of the Mediterranean whose name I really don't like to mention. I don't even like to mention their name. But, they speak a a separate language, and it's very similar in the alphabet to Arabic, and I think people know who I'm talking about. But I like to keep it at that level. And what they would do is there would be, say, a new senator who became, well, let's just make up something, became a committee chairman on armed services. And they invited him to Lolita Island. I'll try to keep this brief, but it's hard because it's so big. They invite him to Lolita Island, and they give him some drinks and say, hey, we can fix you up with a lovely. And he meets two lovelies at a party. And he's led to believe that they're 22, 23, 25, 19. And, you know, they're developed and beautiful. And they give him another drink, and he starts to lose his judgment. And the next day, they introduce him to one of the younger ones and maybe slip him a Mickey in his drink. So he's got a gin and tonic that's got a little Mickey in it. So he loses judgment, and he has a roll in the hay with a little beauty, and maybe she is trained to induce little arguments, and he slaps her around. I don't know. But he learns later that she was underage, or he was told she was underage. And he goes on his little rant saying, my gosh, what do you mean? What do you mean 16? She was at least 20, 21. Okay, that's what we're referring to. That's only one side. The other side would be cocaine parties, where maybe Henry Kissinger would be in the group. And I don't know what kind of drug usage he has, but it doesn't really matter. He's in the group to sort of legitimize the entire party. And this is what they get on tape. And I kind of laughed when I heard the story that Epstein was trying to trade his list of clients for, say, you know, turning state's evidence and getting lighter treatment and maybe having house arrest for 3 years. And he's missing. He's not in his house anymore. And we learn later he's in, you know, Tel Aviv. Oh, I'm sorry. Little southeast Mediterranean nation. They use APAC. They use the Council for Foreign Relations, Council on Foreign Relations, to control a lot. But no, Epstein did not trade a list. Well, what are you talking about? Oh, I traded my list of 84 names. No, we're talking about a building full of libraries of tapes for 30 and 40 years. This is an enormous case. And what I believe has happened, what my best sources indicate, is he was taken out because you can't move him. This is not witness protection where he's running a 7-Eleven in Phoenix, Arizona. Are you kidding me? This is global. You don't do a global witness protection program. The only global witness protection program that I know of, except for like Papa Bush and Hillary level, is a tomb 6 feet under. That's your witness protection. He's protected by 6 feet of earth. That's what I think they gave Epstein.
Now, that does not get rid of all of those videotapes. That does not give away of all of the, what they have on people that they are blackmailing with this. So what happens to everything that's left behind in his wake? Is there like a cleanup crew coming in to deal with that, Jim?
Okay, this is again speculation, but I do have a little bit of information. I was told, for instance, that a deal was cut, and an extensive amount of the files and documents in what I call the library. This is not a few books. This is not 16 tapes. This is like thousands of tapes. This is so much bigger than Hugh Hefner at the Playboy Mansion, and he was also murdered. He had too much leverage on dangerous high-level people of all types, and he tried to play it. Hefner tried to play it, and it ended up boomeranging, and they took him out. I believe this is probably what happened. The white hats, okay, this is Trump, the white hats, and the good guy Pentagon folks who believe in the Constitution and defending the Republic and the people. Okay, that's the good group. The rest is the globalist banker cabal, the swamp, the New World Order types, they just want fascism, control, and wickedness. Okay, I believe the White Hats got control of the library. And with that control, it enabled the arrest. Remember I said the arrest is an event in itself. By grabbing and controlling the library, and I don't have any idea how they did that. I imagine it might have been moved from Lolita Island because they knew, well, that's the obvious place to start looking. I don't know whether there were some flips, like just below the Clintons, or just below Schumer, or just below Soros, that gave away the location of the tapes. Because that library of tapes is a generation of blackmail and one of the most powerful items of data in modern history. That's my view. But here's what I think happened regarding the library. It became known that they confiscated the library. So they were descended upon by the swamp creatures, the cabal, say upper level, not captains, no, not lieutenants and captains, no, this is much higher. The colonels, the majors, the generals, they got approached by them. So here's what I think happened. The swamp was on the case, and the White Hats had maybe a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, to make copies of whatever they could with a very limited amount of time, where they would then say, we didn't copy anything. We only looked. We didn't have enough time. So what they did was they've got some evidence. They've got the goods on some, I think a very small subset. And I don't know if they were able to say, well, we're going to start at the higher level of the hierarchy. I think they just started wherever they could, and it might not have been all that organized. Maybe it was organized. I don't know. It probably was organized. Maybe they were able to go after the high level in their limited amount of time to make copies. But I believe that there was a deal struck to destroy all the evidence. I think the little Mediterranean nation was desperate to have it destroyed, was desperate not for it to see the light of day, not to be on your news networks, not to have, say, Scalia's murder, the Supreme Court justice over a year ago, not to have details of that, not to have Kissinger shown in some videos with cocaine parties, not to have some of the Davos meetings and some of the potentially really shady things going on in the basement, if you know what I'm trying to say, that involve people that are under the age of 10. So I don't really know the details, but I'm thinking, and this is, somewhat a hint given by some sources, that the destruction of the files might have gone hand in hand with some kind of a new deal where the United States is cutting some cords, maybe not all, cutting some cords from the banker cabal in Europe. It's very hard to know. It's extremely hard to know. But we may learn bits and pieces as time flows. We may learn that a certain Hollywood executive and 6 major actors are all exposed, and this is not MXVIM or whatever it's called. It's not related to Epstein. Maybe it is related to Epstein. I don't know. We're going to get some revelations really soon, and already about 3 or 4 actors are extremely worried about the next round of exposures. I'm of the opinion, Paul, really simply stated, if you want to get a series of acting roles in Hollywood movies, and especially if you expect to get an Oscar, you got to play their game with the parties. And the parties are, of the dark side. Let me just leave it at that, because, I think I've been kind of hit at a spiritual level. I'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, it's a good question, Paul. What happens to the files? What happens? This is not like a little cabinet. This is like a library. This is like a 3-room library with like 80 different cabinets. And maybe it's all organized. But I think a good portion of it was destroyed. And I don't think all of it was destroyed. I just don't believe in all or nothing anything. I don't believe that there's only one factor behind the gold market. I don't believe there's only one factor behind, monetary policy toward going back to QE. I don't think there's only one factor behind, say, the rejection of the dollar internationally. No. It's always a combination of things that work simultaneously. And that's how I get, some good forecasts. I don't have rigid thinking. I integrate the criminality. I integrate, a lot of ad hoc stuff. I integrate a lot of unusual information and sources and kind of piece it together. But, you can't follow the financial markets these days without noticing that we're in a heap of shit. And this heap of shit has many sides. We're in deep, deep trouble with the bond market, with the gold market, with the currency market, the dollar, with the oil market, with the stock market, with the fixed income like LIBOR market, with the swap market. We're in trouble with emerging market debt problem. We're in trouble with the shale oil sector. Everything is in trouble. It's not just, where's the trouble these days? No, it's everywhere. Is there any sector that's not in big trouble right now? And I say, no, they're all in big trouble. I've had a forecast probably for the last 3 years. And it was right up to when they began to do the tightening. It was right before then. So it was around 2015 or 16. I said, we're doing everything wrong. We've never fixed anything from QE, from the Lehman issue. It was really a kill. Let's call it the Lehman crisis, the subprime bond, the global financial crisis, all that. The 2008, 2009 problem, which really started in 2006 and 7. I like mentioning this. What was the fuse for the subprime bond problem? It was China. They sold all their Fannie Mae bonds. And all they said was, we're going to focus on treasuries. So in other words, they sold all their Fannie Mae bonds. And it wasn't a small amount. It was like $200 billion at least of Fannie Mae bonds. And 1 year later, we start to see the emergence of the subprime bond problem. My little saying now, my interpretation, is that since we did everything wrong since Lehman, since we loosened all the requirements and the strictures and the rules and regs for buying treasury bonds, in other words, we made them subprime. We've really done all the repetitions, done everything wrong that we did leading to the subprime 2008 problem. We did it all. We've incorporated some monetary policy, got the central banks working together. I mean, the Euro central banks were buying corporate bonds. A year later, the US Fed was buying stock indexes. And then later they were buying crude oil futures. And they said, it's all good. It's all to maintain the system. No, it's all to prevent Wall Street and London Center bank failures. What we did, pardon me, is my sound quality okay? I don't have my headset on.
Yeah, you sound good. You're coming in clear, Jim.
Okay, good. What we did was we incorporated derivative machinery and all the central bank excesses for hidden bond purchases, using their proxies in Wall Street to buy treasury bonds, using they call them it's not the pigs, it's the BIPs. Anyway, it's Belgium, Ireland, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. We use them as a kind of a proxy buying location for treasury bonds. Because if you looked at the TIC report, you could see those 4 countries. There's one that's missing in there. It's a 5-letter acronym, but I got 4 of the 5. That's good enough. The point is made. Belgium was the center. If you added up all their treasury bonds, it was enormous. It was like as much purchase as QE alone. So they were doubling QE using the proxies. Okay, they did that, and they had a lot of hidden derivatives that were purchased directly. I'm told like a couple trillion a month. I mean, this talk of 40 billion a month, 60 billion a month. Okay, it's all nonsense. It's like 20, 30 times bigger, 50 times bigger. What we've done is to create the US Treasury bond as the subprime global bond. It's subprime, has no business being AAA. But as the executive of Standard & Poor learned, if you do a debt downgrade of the US government, you're going to have to end your career and put your life at risk. So nobody among S&P, Fitch, and what's the other one? Moody's, none of them will downgrade the US government debt. It's pristine debt, and therefore, this is kind of a boomerang effect. Therefore, it is pristine debt for usage as collateral. Pristine asset for usage as collateral. And that's what the Chinese did at Wells Fargo. And I think that there's a very big story that's not told, and I've been trying to tell parts of it because it's very difficult to get good information. But I think there was a bank failure at Wells Fargo when we drove the Chinese out of town, and the Chinese began to bug out of town. And the effect was lost collateral, lost base, and the whole asset base kind of crumbled in Wells Fargo. And there was a visit, I think it was around May, of a bunch of Treasury officials. I think they were Treasury officials. They don't have markings, US Treasury. They just have US government or FBI, something false. FBI, okay. FBI walked in and took over the place for a weekend, and a lot of accounts were inaccessible for a matter of 2 or 3 business days. I think Wells Fargo had a failure event. Okay, so my point is that the Treasury bond doesn't deserve its AAA. It's being used as collateral by Chinese to buy up commercial property in the United States. And now watch the vacuum, because I'm hearing that they're beginning to pull out of commercial property in the big US urban centers. And we're talking about 35% Chinese ownership of commercial property in the United States. I'm talking about office buildings, office parks, commercial centers like big malls, and combinations there. It's pretty hard to find a mall nowadays that doesn't have a small office building. Okay, so the US is in a big pickle where the outcome of the subprime bond is almost assured as the outcome of the US Treasuries, because we repeated the problems. This is not going to end well, Paul, and we've already had some auction failures. The Treasury, US Treasury auction failures. There was one about 3 weeks ago, and they actually put in the news report that it was a telephone-only auction. Why would they do that? Very simple. They didn't want it to be in a conference room at a New York hotel, or the New York Fed sidebar room, or wherever they usually do it. I don't know where they usually do it. I got crossed eyelid hairs. I'm sorry. So they did a telephone interview to do the auctioning, and they anticipated a failure, and they got a failure. So what was not revealed was, say, the bid to cover. They didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about a couple of other statistics that are standard items on the outcome of auctions. Okay, so they did the telephone auction to hide the failure. And we've been boasting for years. There's never been a US Treasury auction failure. Yeah, now they have 2, because there was another one a couple of weeks later. It's like every 2 weeks. I'm hearing that before, I think, the end of October, the US government has to complete auction sales of at least $400 billion of treasuries of various maturities. And that just means, like, well, it's a 3-month, 6-month, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, all the maturity. 400 billion, and it might be before the end of October. It might be the end of September. It's hard to get, good information. It's hard to remember everything. It's just very hard. I do the best I can. But
you do stay on top of a lot of it, and there's so much to stay on top of, because there's just so many questions that you make me think about when you're talking about the bond market. For example, the deficits are exploding, right? And you're telling me that if the United States bond market is basically a junk bond market, what's that going to look like when the deficits are exploding? And then on top of that, we have the yield on the 10-year note plunging just last week. So you have a lot of forecasts. Do you put those forecasts in your hat trick letter in addition to the analysis, or like with predictions on that as well every month, Jim?
Yes, I do. And let's see if I can bring up some of these forecasts.
Because
Pardon me.
people aren't expecting that plunge in the 10 yield. It got down to 1.5 something last week, and it was like above 3.2% not even a year ago.
This is while we've got 22 trillion in debt that needs to get rolled over from time to time in parts. This is when we got 1.2 minimum trillion in deficit that I believe is going to be closer to 1.5, maybe over 1.5 trillion. This is when a lot of dumping is going on with US Treasuries. So we're getting a rally. I actually forecasted months ago we're going to see a rally in Treasury bonds, even though we have a crisis of debt. And they might actually, undermine the stock market in order to drive money out so that it'll find the safe haven of the Treasury bond. Okay, this is just a quick list. I'm not going to go into detail at all. A quick list of forecasts that have been on my book, on my wall for 4 years, and they're all hitting. And you can find this on the hat trick letter. I'll mention more about that when I'm done with the list. The gold trade note is launched, like for oil payment between China and Saudis. Germany is flipping east. They're just fed up with our Nord Stream interruptions, threats, and they got workarounds with the Russian subsidiaries of German companies. The Chinese are buying oil from the Saudis and paying in RMB. It shows up in the Aramco balance sheet. Can't hide that for a bond auction with disclosure. U.S. government is tossing the Saudis under the bus. Trump announced that we're going to, you might as well use the word confiscate. He said we're not going to return. Confiscate 3 trillion or more of Saudi treasury bonds. Okay, that's throwing them under the bus. They kind of need that money at $3,000 billion. The U.S. Fed reverts to infinite QE forever. We just got the forever a couple months ago, and now we're starting to see more and more initial steps toward QE again, and it's being seen in the form of reducing their cash balance sheet. Where's the cash? They're buying treasuries. So they're doing all the sideline things before they go to the core for the resumption of QE in full glory. U.S. Treasury bond is recognized as a global subprime bond. I've seen 2 analysts refer to the treasuries as subprime bond, not sublime, subprime bond. And it kind of warms the cockles of my heart. Numerous non-U.S. dollar bank transfer facilities are emerging. I think 3 years ago we had the Chinese interbank payment system, CHIPS. It's sometimes called the Chinese it's cross-border. Ooh. It's a cross-border interbank payment system, CHIPS, CIPS. Some people call it the Chinese interbank payments, whatever. I think it's being used between China and Russia. But now we got INSTEX between Germany and Iran, and Putin wants to join it. Putin wants to invite India in it. And I'm seeing INSTEX as eventually becoming the European standard payment channel in oil payments for euro denomination. Wow. Putin is seeing this as a crack. He's putting a crowbar in it and he's opening it. He's a master chess player. Britain seeks a role in the Belt and Road Initiative. They went, I think, crawling on their knees looking to get more action in the Eurasian trade zone for, say, finance, funding projects. That's a forecast from 2 or 3 years ago. They're battling with Frankfurt, Germany. Iran becomes a vital member of the Eurasian trade zone. Oh, it's already becoming very powerful. They're building up their ports to service a lot of maritime routes. They've had an import-export bank with China for quite a while. This is just going to expand with the INSTEX German connection. The U.S. loses control of the oil market as OPEC dissolves. OPEC has pretty much been a dead entity for 2 years, and what's replaced it, the vacuum, has been the Russian Rosneft. and it's a non-dollar basis, and they're buying oil from the Saudis, they're buying oil from Iran, they're buying oil from Venezuela, and they're doing the mixing and viscosity and blending, all that function, in order to make sure that those 3 nations, Iran, Saudi, and Venezuela, have non-dollar liquidity. And as the volume of the oil market declines in dollar terms, we're seeing problems in the United States. You're going to see a sub 40 oil price. The dual universe comes into form. Oh gosh, this is so plain. The Belt and Road Initiative, Paul, you may not know this, has recorded for the first 6 months of this year $600 billion of paid trade. Not planned, not memorandum of understanding, paid trade on finished or partially finished projects. I say the East will have the yuan RMB, the West will have the dollar with, and it's different. The East is going to have RMB with nations joining voluntarily. The West is going to have continued dollar with coercion to remain. Very different. And the frontier is Germany, Iran, and that whole centers. Eastern Europe, some of Europe, like France and England, signed on to the Instex German-Iran connection. The frontier zone is going to be full of friction. Shanghai gradually wrests control of the gold market. It's got something like 20 times the volume of physical delivery compared to London. The US bond market unravels as crisis expands, and we're seeing it now all over the place. I could have 20 different individual items of how the US bond market is fracturing. They're barely holding it together. And the last one is the US finds utter isolation. And there was a Japanese-based G20 recently where Trump was told you are going to be completely isolated, not just in this meeting, but as a nation, unless you start to cooperate more among the community of nations. Okay, Paul, these forecasts are all over the place every single month in the hat trick letter. I may not talk about each of the 14 in every single month, but I talk about at least half of them and updates, and this is going to really work toward Germany flipping, and you're going to see more of the gold trade note, and we're seeing it like in the Italian trade guarantee. Italian Chinese trade now has a basis in the gold trade note, which means if anything goes wrong, the Chinese can come in and claim some of the Italian gold. Okay, this is how global trade is going to be developed. The gold trade note will be a guarantor, but the gold trade note will also be a payment system like for oil shipments. The hat trick letter has been around for 15 years plus now. In April is 15 years. I never thought it would go this long. I'm just tickled that it's been a success. I'm tickled that I get good reviews. I'm very happy, and I don't like to use the word proud. I'm pleased, and I'm very content that I've got over an 80%, over 85% correct forecast. I was told Germany flipping east, Jim, that's one of your wrong forecasts. No, just wait. I said in 2018, just wait. Just wait. It'll be more clear. And then you have the Nord Stream 2 firestorm of controversy, which the United States government lost in a trade settlement court at the European Union in Brussels. We lost. But the hat trick letter is now a single report. I call it the Global Gold Reset Report. And on the website, it's now golden-jackass. This is kind of a midway point. I'm going to do a review. I hope it's okay.
Sure, go ahead, Jim. Since
January, and I got to be honest, I got a European-based website manager. He's a fine guy. He's a smart guy, and he's got varied skills, which really helps a lot when you do promotion and, like Google, various web searches and getting captured from search, just a lot of different things that he's added value to. We started this about last June or July, and he said, do you mind if I create a shadow site? And I said, okay, this might become much bigger. And he said, I hope so. We'll have to talk about that. It evolved. And I started supplying him more and more, and eventually he had all the way back to January 2018 on the site. And then it's how do we locate the buttons, and a lot of different questions. There's lots and lots of different questions that have to be satisfied. But it's golden-jackass.com with the same carryover on rights and all that stuff. But what got my attention was his question to me: are you aware? at least in Western Europe, what percentage of internet users are operating on a portable device. And I said, oh gosh, I don't know, when was the poll taken? He said late 2017. I said, okay, I'll guess 40%. He said, it's actually 62. I said, wow. And I have a website, the goldenjackass.com, that has a little bit of trouble with, say, the iPhone and some of the bigger tablets and bigger smartphones. Apple has a lot of competition, and Apple's not the best by any means anymore. They're just the most expensive. So we got this website, the golden hyphen, we call it the hyphen site now. The hyphen site is very user-friendly to a wide assortment of portable devices. But I got to mention something that's unfortunate. And, it's humbling, Paul. This is not the first time I've mentioned this, but I've gotten myself in trouble. I've been here 12 and a half years. I got myself in trouble. The first 3 or 4 were just, glorious fun, a lot of good weather. Even during rainy season, it's really nice until noon. So you can go out and enjoy the entire morning in the park and come back for the afternoon rain. It's kind of programmed rain. But I had a really nice long string of successes, doing a room addition for a couple little kids, an aunt, a friend of the family. And I thought, okay, this is a nice thing to do. And they're good little kids, and now they're grown up, and they're dating. And I met one's boyfriend. And it's just nice. I had a little piece of their development to give them the privacy of their own bedroom. But I tried to branch out, and I got slammed. I don't like to offer a whole lot of details, but there's a donate button on my website, the golden-jackass site. But there's also a why donate. And it's a link, and it gives an explanation in 4 paragraphs of what happened. And just a quick nutshell. I'll give more information at the end of the hour. A quick nut is there's a lot of fraud in Costa Rica. Property title had a fraud, had a hidden property tax, had a hidden mortgage, wasn't on the title at purchase time. Involved in a condominium, water subcontractor fraud. The guy who did the repair several months later, he also committed fraud. We're talking about $20,000, $30,000 losses at a shot. There was a faulty construction, had to be redone. All ceramic floors had to be redone. 30,000. But the pièce de résistance was a crime scene, which I'll give more information later. So I've got a donate button, and I'm asking people to help out. There are a lot of people out there who've been following my work, and there's no obligation. This is a humble request with lowered head. I got myself in trouble, and I'm hoping to raise 6 figures to get myself out of a hole. I've got some debts that I can't pay. I'll mention more about that at the end of the hour. But the donate button is for a PayPal donation that has no tax consequences. And so far, after 6 weeks, it's been working, kind of well. I want to run this for several months, and it's a tough call how long. But if you're a follower who's never subscribed or used to subscribe to my newsletter for, I'm getting returning clients, and it's wonderful, Paul. It's just wonderful. And a message, I was a client of yours from 2012 to 15, and now shit's hit the fan. I'm signed up again because I want to know more what's going on, because this looks like, as you say, a repeat of 2008, but bigger. Okay, they're coming back. But if you're an old follower or an old client, just hit the donate button, pitch in something, and help me out, because they add up. Okay, that's all I'll say at this point. I'll mention more at the end of the hour, but
I just wanted to jump in real quick there, Jim, if I could. I lived in Mexico for 2 years, and there is a lot of fraud that's deeply embedded in Latin America with what I would call some very shady stuff. But my point that I'd like to make to you is, this is coming to the United States, Jim. I used to live in El Paso, Texas for many years, right on the border. I had a car accident there one time. I also purchased a house there one time. And there is a lot of shady stuff that goes on where you think you're getting your car fixed and they're using used parts and not using new parts. Or you're getting your house built and all of a sudden you find out that it's passing inspections and it's not supposed to have been passing inspections because of the way they cut the wood. There's just a lot of shady, underhanded stuff that's going on. Now, obviously, yours is leagues different and above and beyond what I've
Another level,
experienced. But
entirely different level.
entirely different level. But my point I'd like to make is, this is coming here. This type of stuff that is going to affect people, is basically what happens when you go from a first world nation to a developing nation. This is developing nation kind of stuff. Would you agree with that, Jim?
It is what I call it. I'm very plain about it. This is the march to the third world for the United States. And if we don't get our act together, returning and reviving the industrial sector, we're going to get our entire standard of living dropped down another level. We're about to get treated to some rather nasty price inflation that's far more than food, far more than just shortage based. It's going to be monetary inflation based. The food inflation is going to be shortage based. We're going to get other monetary based inflation across the board. I think we're going to get to the 10% price inflation that will be undeniable. And that will really lift gold, but not uniformly, because when you have problems that result in lost jobs, you don't lift gold as much as you would before. You really then rely on the gold demand being from the largest players. And believe me, they dominate, but it's not going to be so much. Your little guy in Santa Fe or Colorado or St. Louis or Chicago or Philadelphia. No, it's going to be the bigger players where each one of them is equal to like 50 individuals. The march to the third world is going to be painful for the United States, and I think we've gotten a glimpse of it in the last 10 years, because since Lehman, Paul, I mean this seriously, since Lehman, we've been on a downward track toward the third world, step by step. I've got clients tell me, Jim, you wouldn't believe it. I live in the north, like, Illinois or Pennsylvania or New York. And occasionally I encounter potholes on the interstate. We never had that before. So they're marked, and there's traffic that weaves around it. Okay, I'm not saying it's on every interstate, but we've got lots of problems. We've got bridges that are shut down because they can't be fixed or replaced. We do not have the world's best internet broadband connections. Countries like South Korea do. They're way ahead of us. And I've got one client buddy, and he comes and talks once in a while. He makes visits. And he went to China 3 years ago. He said, Jim, it was the most eye-opening experience I've ever seen in my life. You go to a giant center, and there are 20 trains, and they're heading to 20 cities. And it's all streamlined, and it's all modern. You go to Los Angeles, so what do you see? Interstates that are impressive when they're empty, but interstates that are gridlocked during rush hour. And it takes, it's kind of funny, but 2.5 Men with Charlie Sheen. I like that show. I know he's a weird guy. I know he's kind of Okay, that aside, they did have some elements where they exposed the traffic problems there, and I just like the show. Before Ashton Kutcher, whatever is it, the replacement, the tall, good-looking guy who played Apple's CEO, Steve Jobs, in movies, and Friends with Privileges, the movie. I'm a movie buff. I wouldn't mind watching The Accountant with Ben Affleck. I wouldn't mind watching that the 12th time, rather than go for a walk around the block or something at 9 p.m. The march to the third world is going to be very shocking. We don't have a lot of time. We need to reindustrialize. Remember Trump in 2016, he said, we need to reindustrialize the United States. I got $1 trillion program. Yeah, where'd it go? Come on, Donald, where'd it go? Okay, I'll tell you where it went. It got sidetracked because he had to hire Goldman Sachs and military representatives on his cabinet. So what is their first big budget act? Big aid for the banks and an increase to the military budget. Where's your 5-year plan, Donald, for reindustrializing the United States? I think it's his second term plan. I think he realized quickly, I can't do this. Not only am I owing to Goldman Sachs and the military boys, but we can't really encourage foreign investment at this point. So let's get the 4 years going. Let's make some progress. And I think not right away in the second term, if he runs. He might not. I don't know. I don't know. This is very weird. I think he's lost the farm state vote. But I have a joke that I've been saying. He could lose 10% more of his standard fixed, what's the word, loyal base in the farm state. He could lose 10% and still win the state. Because what are the Democrats going to produce? Some socialist moron like Bernie Sanders? Even if he's a vice president, he'll be able to speak. And if he even speaks, he'll sound stupid. Some of the stupidest economic plans I have ever heard in my life have come from the Democrats. It's all about taxing and not building the base, just squeezing the base while it shrinks. I think we're going to get a program for reindustrializing that involves a goal of 20 to 30,000 new businesses in the 50 states with free trade zone. Little known to American public, almost every single of the 50 states has a free trade zone. And you know, what are some of the typical things in it? Well, it's stuff like 3-year moratorium on property tax, on income tax, and a little bonus for pitch into some of the hiring costs, new job costs, wage costs, subsidies. Okay, this is how you get reindustrialized. And I did a story about 2016 of a Chinese manager in Alabama who was in a fabrication plant for copper tubing, and 40% was exported to China. This is what we need to do. And people say, oh gosh, why should we just do all the export? So we reduce our trade deficit. Okay. I'd like to get to the Fed because there's some very big things happening with the Fed. They have never been this cornered in all my years of watching.
Yeah, and I don't even know how they're going to handle what you're saying. Does not spell good news for the US dollar at all. They seem like they're definitely in a pickle here, along with the United States government, Jim.
When I say they're in the corner from, it's hard to identify how many. Let's just say a list of factors. The first is the US economy is in bad shape. I don't care what they say. Trump is sounding like a fool when he says the US economy has never been stronger. No, it's never been weaker, and we've never had more consecutive years of a recession. John Williams of the Shadow Government Statistics Group is on record as saying we have 2 positive quarters for GDP since '04. I document how we're lying about price inflation by at least 6%, which means we're overstating economic growth by at least 6%. So if we say it's +2, it's really -4. We've got 12 consecutive years of recession. And that's been documented by a number of different sources, not just shadow government statistics, but he does a great job. Okay, that's one factor. The other factor is nations are dumping treasury bonds. And the Fed has to do something. Lowering interest rates is not going to help that. Amplifying the QE volume of bond purchases will help that. And a little sidebar, I think that not only will the Fed be expanding the U.S. government debt purchases, I think they're going to expand to new ground by monetizing, say, Boeing. And how would they do that? Well, easy. Their preferred stock. Remember the $700 billion that was stolen by Wall Street that was designed by the Fed, by the U.S. Congress for being lendable capital to keep commercial lending going? Well, Wall Street stole it with no consequence, not a single charge. They stole $700 billion. You steal $7,000 and you go to jail. You steal $700 billion and you get a cabinet post. What did they do with the $700 billion but purchase preferred stock of the Wall Street banks? In other words, they bailed out the owners of the banks. And that's an amazing thing they did and got away with. They didn't just steal it, they gave it to the owners of the banks. So it was a bank heist. The Fed needs to amplify debt security, US Treasury bond purchases, because foreigners are dumping it. They've never been dumping it at so rapid and high a volume. This is colossal. There are other factors involved. U.S. government debt is growing out of control. You mentioned this. Okay, I said that there's some estimates say it's 1.2 trillion for this current fiscal year. Oh, no. It's going to be closer to 1.5. And we're always a quarter behind in the accounting, so this has already happened. You can't say, well, we're going to fix this before the end of the year. What, in the next 7 weeks? I don't think so, because the end of September is the end of the fiscal year. And I got my own trajectory, and I got my own methods of calculating, and I got my own sources of information, and I got my own, ideas on off-balance sheet costs. I think it's going to be closer to 1.5 trillion this year. And if you recall some of my forecasts way back in 2009 and 2010, I said we're going to have trillion-dollar annual deficits for as far as the eye can see. And 2013, we had our first, and we've had one every single year since. They lie about it. Here's how they lie. They say, well, we got an off-balance sheet item there. We did some farm aid. Oh, we got an off-balance sheet. Oh, we did some, some bank bond emergency funding stuff. Okay. My method is so much simpler. I don't ask an accountant to give me a long, drawn-out accounting sheet, factors for adjusting and seasonal this. And you don't do seasonal adjustment on annual data. I have a much simpler method. What was the debt at the end of September a year ago? What is the debt at the end of September this year? Let me subtract the two. That's how you get it. What's the U.S. government debt now? What was it a year ago? That's how much the deficit is. I don't care about all the Mickey Mouse accounting nonsense gimmickry. It's going to be about 1.5 trillion, which means these auction failures are becoming an acute problem. The U.S. government must have success in their debt security issuance and acceptance, and they're not getting it. I would estimate that 70%, Paul, of all U.S. Treasury bond purchases now are through back doors, using proxies, and are actually the Department of Treasury buying its own debt using the interest rate swap derivative and other machinery, financial engineering machinery. It just swaps and trades and oh my gosh. I think it's 70%, which is what I'm saying now is up to close to 1 trillion a year of our debt is being purchased from the derivative machinery. This will not last long. The Fed has got some very interesting new problems. They just did a 25 basis point, 25 1/100ths of 1%, 25 basis point, BPP, they call them beeps. They did 25 BPT cut and lied about the condition of the U.S. economy. They said the economy is beginning to rebound or in the middle stage of recovery. It's all bullshit lies, it's all propaganda, pure and simple. What they should have said was, we're at the beginning of a rate cutting cycle and we regret to admit this, but they're not honest, they're liars. They also said that this is going to be kind of a one-shot deal, and that's a lie. They also said that the volume will be contained, and that's a lie. So they're going to have a series of cuts and ramping up of volume, and I believe they're going to bail out, monetize Boeing. They also might monetize Wells Fargo. I don't know. They don't give us a list. We have to look to see which are the sickest patients. And in 06 and 07, especially in late 07 and early 08, I determined Fannie Mae and Lehman were very sick children. And with Fannie Mae, it was a 90%, 80%, 70% drop on their stock price. And with that was Fannie Mae. And with Lehman, it was a fast rise in early 08 of their credit default swap, which is basically a failure insurance policy against their corporate bond. So their insurance policy failure percentage went up, up, up. I don't remember the exact number, but usually they're like at 0.5%, 0.4%. It moved up to like 2.5% and 3%. Like, uh-oh, it's moved up a lot in the last 3 months. We got a failure event. I said that in like March, April of '08. Okay. Now you look at the events that are a little more non-quantitative, like invasion of Treasury officials at Wells Fargo and accounts that couldn't be accessed and Chinese bugging out of town. So I think Wells and Boeing might be monetized. But we got a new phenomenon that really caught me by surprise and brought a smile to my face. New Zealand cut aggressively. They were more honest. They cut by 50 basis points, and their currency, the Kiwi dollar, NZ dollar, they call it the Kiwi because, unique name. The Kiwi dollar fell. Not a little. I don't have the exact numbers. I will for the August hat trick letter, which is, in the formulating stage right now. So New Zealand, through their honesty at their central bank, did something that resulted in their currency coming down rather harshly, in the world of Forex currencies. In other words, the dollar went up versus the Kiwi dollar because the US officials lied and didn't take a proper aggressive cut. Well, I came to learn yesterday that India and Thailand also made rate cuts. And I believe both of them made minimal rate cuts, but more honest language, they call it. The press release on description of conditions was more honestly stated. So the Fed is now getting pressure from all the secondary central banks because they're acting more honestly and they're talking openly about more cuts coming, whereas we're saying, well, this might be the last one. We got a strong economy. They're saying we got a weak economy, we're going to cut, and we're going to cut more. So their currencies are going down, the dollar's going up, and the Fed has even more pressure. And as the Fed feels the pressure, they're going to cut. And when there's a consensus change of perception, like, oh my gosh, the Fed's really not going to be light on the accelerator. They're going to go whole hog and aggressive. That's going to cause a big change to the currency market. And I think the biggest effect will be with the gold. So what you saw with New Zealand was a big jump in the gold price in Kiwi dollar terms. We've got something like 50 nations that have a rise in the gold price relative to their currency, the local gold price. And you got, roughly an equal number of nations with negative bond yield. It's getting out of control. The breakdown is everywhere you look. So we got failed auctions, foreign central banks cutting faster, an inverted yield curve, screwy swap rates, and it's very good for gold. And you got the Fed under pressure with the lousy economy and huge deficits. And it's going to be good for gold, what they've begun and haven't yet admitted to. Oh gosh, you're going to have a big tidal wave. We've just had a move from 1,400 close to 1,500 in the US dollar gold price, Paul. And I got some, some naive type questions. It's okay. But Jim, you think this is it? We go to 1,500, we back down for a year. I say, no, we're going straight for 1,900. The time that it took to go to 1,400 to 1,500 was what, month and a half? The time between 1,500 and 1,600, I think it's going to be about 3 weeks.